Hey, I'm going to talk about a few things that might ruffle some feathers here, so just sit tight and let's have a conversation. So all the time I hear people talking about how PC players have such a large advantage and how it's basically unfair for console players in the PC realm and crossplay realm. Well, the conversation I really want to have is I come from motorsports and I come from professional bass fishing and things like that where money wins you things. Money buys you things. The gaming space is the same way, but gaming space is significantly cheaper. I would argue that gaming and PC gaming, in like the grand scheme of things, is one of the cheaper hobbies that you could ever have. And I mean, think about this: if you're gonna fish in a bass tournament, are you gonna compete in a John boat, a 12-foot John boat, or are you gonna pick a 21-foot Ranger, 250 horse Evinrude, or Mercury nowadays, I guess? I mean, you're gonna pick the Ranger every time. Just like if you're racing, am I gonna show up to the track in a Miata, or I'm gonna show up to the track in a 911 GT3 given the option? I'm gonna pick the GT3 given the option. In the same way that when I sit down on my mouse and keyboard, am I gonna use the stock Dell mouse and keyboard? Absolutely not. I'm gonna upgrade this to a new Logitech system, or Steel Series, or whatever system you want. Just like some of you guys are using base controllers, or some of you guys are using scuffs. There's a range of financial things in the Call of Duty world, and the gaming world especially. And like I said, I think that gaming is one of the cheapest hobbies to get into. I mean, think about it. Let's look at my screen. I'm going to show you guys what I'm talking about here. So if we're talking about getting into PC gaming, the floor is significantly higher than it is for console. So yes, I can go pick up 10-year-old equipment, but it's still going to cost me an absolute crap ton unless I get the stuff used. And at that point, if you're smart about it, you can have a gaming PC for under $100. Like, I built my girlfriend's rig that played Warzone for under $150. And it played at 35 frames or so. Now, did I give up some things like 1080p? Absolutely. That's part of the game. I mean, the PC gaming realm versus the console realm, which is now becoming more like the PC realm, we're running into a few different things at this point with purchasing points. I mean, like, Warzone specifically. So looking at the minimum specs, what we're going to notice is that it really wants an old style bulldozer architecture, and an old video card works just fine. And these are really basic specs to find laying around anywhere. Now, mind you, obviously you're going to want, a 1660 or an RX 580 or something like that, but sometimes that's just not a feasible option, especially right now with the current issues finding video card and things like that. Which means pre-builts are all the more better option right now. So taking a look at a pre-built computer, if I was going to go buy a pre-built computer right now that's like a base starter setup, you're looking at around $1,500, and that is kind of getting you going. In fact, though, that is like with mouse and keyboard and things like that. And you could obviously lower those prices by building this yourself, if you can find a video card. But again, finding a video card is like the vast majority of the problem right now. If you want to step up to something more like what I'm using, you're looking at more like around $2,000 or so. And again, you're only sitting at 175 frames for around $2,000. And if you want to run 1440p, which most people would want to do, you're going to go to 135 frames. And frames can immediately be impacted. So if these guys are streaming, you're going to lose 20, 30, 40 frames off that, just off the rip. You're going to have just some other issues here and there with these computers as well, versus, a console. Is my computer, I have to kind of give it maintenance. I have to spend time 3-4 hours a week going through it, making sure it's okay, going through the water loops every once in a while, checking that. Just kind of going through things on a higher end system. It's more like working on, say, like a Ferrari, right? Ferraris, they're way more maintenance prone than a Toyota. That's just how it is. And that's part of paying for something that's a little more finicky, but also a little more fun, I would say. But if you're just a casual gamer, the Xbox One X, I mean, those things are probably like, or the Xbox One S, I think is what it is nowadays. Yeah, the S. Those things are worth getting for $300, dude. That's totally a great price if you're just wanting to casually game. But if you want to start taking things a little more seriously, you're wanting more frames, or you're wanting things to run a little more smoothly, check out the PS4 Pro for $400. This seems like an actually excellent option right now, especially because the PS5 is sitting at a solid like $900 on a regular basis. People are just sniping up as they come and reposting them immediately. I mean, it's been a real problem. But, you know, and the PS5 puts itself in a really bad position as well, because, I mean, yeah, you can get 120 frames or so, I think is what it was on Warzone. But, again, $900. So you're going to spend $900 here for the like performance of this $1,500 computer, if not better than this $1,500 computer. So while the PS5 is still actually very, very expensive for what it is, it's still cheap compared to a good gaming computer. And looking at the Xbox Series X, we see that the Xbox Series X on eBay is pretty stable around $675, $700 or so. And that's pretty much a fair price for the performance that you get out of it. Oh, and that's not the only part of these two, is you need a TV or a monitor that also has those frame rates. You need HDMI 2.0, you need potentially other plugs, other controllers, things like that. Like the controllers, for instance, is, yeah, you can play just fine in a regular mouse and keyboard, you can play regular controllers just fine, but once you start stepping up into the realm of custom mouse, custom keyboard, and like aftermarket controllers, it's hard to go back. Looking at like the scuffs, for instance, I mean, we're sitting at, you know, $150, $200, call it high end, for a fantastic controller that gives you a for sure competitive advantage in the paddles in the back, as well as the mouse click triggers and things like that. And obviously they're a little more expensive for different systems. There's other options, things like that with those. But you do have the option of going with something like the Control Freaks or the sticks. Those give you a big advantage for a very small price. And for people that are on like the lower end systems and just not wanting to spend a bunch of money, these are an excellent option versus picking up a new scuff or a new, you know, cinch or whatever your controller of choice is. You know, and it's just like I said earlier, you know, using the factory Dell or IBM mouse and keyboard. No, I'm going to pick up my G903. I'm going to grab a G10 keyboard, and I'm going to, you know, make hay while I can with gear that makes sense for the equipment that I'm using and the level that I'm playing at. Obviously, I wouldn't play as well if I had a stock controller as if I had a scuff. I wouldn't play as well as if I had the super low DPI, horrible censored stock Dell or IBM mouse as a G903 or a SteelSeries or anything else, basically. What I'm saying, I mean, after all of this, is that we all have choices to make, and we all have decisions in our life that need to steer us one way or the other. And looking at like Steam charts, you'll see here that for the most part, a lot of people are using pretty low-end equipment. And the fallacy of all PC gamers have 200 frames, and the fallacy of all PC gamers have 120 frames, in fact, is not even remotely true, in that most of these video cards are going to run 60 frames or less, and likely have strong dips that your consoles don't have. But again, these are decisions that these people are making, in that they chose to have that lower-end system because it's either what they could find, or it's what they could afford. And I'm not saying, like, you know, anything against that. I ran a system for the longest time that was god-awful. I got 35 frames on most games, and I ran 720p because that's what I could afford at that time. I'm just lucky enough at this point in my life where I could have saved up enough money to purchase what I want when I wanted it. Unfortunately, that's not the case right now, and people are kind of having to deal with what they have to deal with and using just weird parts in weird combinations. But guys, I mean, I'm sorry to rant at you a little bit, but I see a lot of guys talking about this, and I think the biggest discussion that we need to have actually isn't necessarily the hardware. It's not necessarily the software limitations. It's what mental state and game state we have and what the developers are doing with the game. blaming PC gamers for the lack of FOV in Warzone is ridiculous. Blaming aim assist on console players is ridiculous. We all make our choices. If you want aim assist, play on controller. If you want high FOV right now, which is a whole other conversation, play on PC. Even though it's literally any file, config file, it's, you know, that's a whole other conversation. And we're going to talk about the difference in FOV in probably one of the next videos coming up, because I briefly touched on it. And yeah, it is a massive advantage, but I don't think you guys are thinking about it as the type of advantage that it actually is. I think you guys are focusing heavily on the field of view, which makes sense, but you're not focusing on the other attributes that it gives you that are both hindrances and benefits. But if you guys are interested in hearing that rant, go and hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, give it a like. I know it's kind of going to be a controversial one. If you guys have a comment, dude, leave it down below. I want to hear what you guys have to say about it. I want to hear what you guys have got to say. I played on console for 5 years. When I couldn't afford a good gaming computer, that's what I played on. I played on the PS4, played on the PS3, and then made the switch back to PC once I could afford it again after working and working and working to get one. But have a good one, guys. See you around.